Hey folks, welcome to the 15th episode of the DevConnect show. Today, our guest is from Fishers, Indiana. He's an 8-time MVP. He was the first one to bring me on his show when I made my XrmToolBox tool called PCF Builder. His motto is always raising the bar. I guess I gave it away. So please welcome my dear friend Daryl LaBar. Hi Daryl, welcome to the DevConnect show.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for accepting my invite to come here and talk about early bound generator. But before we start diving into the tool itself, I just
Mhm.
wanted to ask a few questions. And the first one that pops into my mind is, how did your journey started in CRM?
Yeah, it was a while ago. So I was a regular just .NET developer, um, and I had a good friend that got hired on at a consulting firm, and he's like, "Hey, why don't you come interview?" I was like, "Okay." And the first gig they had that opened up was a CRM 2011 upgrade from 4.0 on prem, and because there was no online at the time, and I said, "I don't really know if I want to do that," but my friend who got me hired in the company. That he was in charge of that basically of CRM. So I was like, oh great, I'll work with my friend. It'd be great. I never worked with him once. Was always on some other project. So, yeah, I got started on it, and I was like, man, I am not very good at making things pretty. And CRM at the time, everything's you don't get a choice in what it looks like. So that was good for me.
Right,
I didn't have to worry about that. I could focus on the logic and focus on providing value, and I didn't have to worry about it being ugly. Or I didn't have to worry about me making it uglier than what it already was. Or maybe that's the
right,
correct way of saying that. So,
right.
but yeah, that's how I got started way back in 2011, and I haven't turned around.
Yeah, but then before that, you were a full stack developer or a back end developer. How that was working?
Oh yeah, so it was great. I started off my post college VP6 was my first language I started developing
Nice,
in. Then they transitioned to DB.NET,
right?
and then so I made that jump, and then within like a month they said, you know what, let's just go straight to C sharp. And so I made that jump. And I remember asking the friend that actually hired me at this other place, the same guy I worked together at the first job. I was like, there's really no difference between DB.NET and C sharp. Why do they get paid more? Why do C sharp developers get paid more? He said, I don't know, but it's our God-given right to take their money. That's what he said. So I laughed at that one. That was a good comment. So yeah, I made the jump to that, and then I worked for in Indianapolis. There was a like a Best Buy company that was headquartered out of Indianapolis, and so I worked at their headquarters for a while after that company, and was doing mostly ASP.NET backend stuff for their own internal website, so they could purchase items for the store, batteries, lamps, and lights, and that kind of stuff that they would run out, but they wouldn't sell. It was just stuff that they needed, and so we'd be able to ship it out in the next truck for them, all that kind of fun stuff. So yeah,
Nice.
that
Yeah,
was my last job before going solely CRM, Dataverse, Power Apps.
yeah. Do you ever miss going back and doing the things that you were doing before CRM?
Oh, I mean,
I know
I
the answer.
was, I no, I don't. There's always so much more you had to keep on being on top of in that world that it.
Right,
Now there's whole world of what Microsoft's creating and putting in the platform, but the actual like development itself hasn't really changed
right.
a whole lot. I mean, I still haven't picked up React yet. I did miss the what did David Yak make the power not share Silverlight. Yeah, I completely
Oh,
missed the Silverlight train, so I'm happy that I didn't invest any time in that.
right.
But yeah, so I'm just if I'm helping long enough, React will just something else come on, then maybe I'll learn that one. So I'm hoping to miss that boat, but nah, we'll
Yeah,
see.
yeah. So you're an MVP. You have been involved in the community. You have been
Mm-hmm.
doing a lot of podcasting and a lot of other work for the community. What would your suggestion be for the people who want to get started in the community?
Yeah. So the back in the day was Stack Overflow, which was really great. Now AI and the community forums have kind of replaced that almost entirely. Although I still listen to anything that's on the Stack Overflow realm, but there's like 1 or 2 questions a month or something. It's hardly anything. So yeah, the community forums are awesome through Microsoft, but then like the best way to like learn really, I think, is to be a part of the Level Up Discord group, which of course you are familiar with. And that's been, back in the day when I first became an MVP, the MVP Slack channel where we were like communicating all the time was like golden because I could reach out and ask somebody a question and get an answer on something. That's still there, but I feel like as far as like just straight development, I actually just ask my questions in Discord now because it's most of the MVPs are there, but then there's a whole lot of people that aren't MVPs that have a lot of knowledge as well. So it's great to hear from them. So yeah, if you're not there, I don't know what you're doing. If you're trying to grow in the community. So yeah.
Yeah. And it's sometimes it's really hard to even keep up because there's so many wonderful conversations going on in each of those channels. But it's awesome to see everyone so engaged and talking so passionately talking about technologies, right? So it's nice to see that.
And there's even people that are on-prem on there, so that's always interesting. They bring up an issue, it's like, oh wait, you're on-prem. Yeah, that won't work for you.
Right. All right, so let's talk about your early bound generator, right? So first, when you made this early bound generator, it was probably a few years ago, right? But then what made you come up with that tool? Like, what was your idea? What was your backing in?
I hate coming up with command line parameters. So that was like the first thing was like, why do I have to come up with a command line parameter? I hate coming up with command line parameters, and I'm always having to keep it copied for the right client. If you have multiple clients, you have to make sure you're finding the right one. So that was one issue. I've made quite a few like code generator type stuff back when I was working on just standard ASP.NET. I probably should have found the open source stuff in the community to use back then for that, but I wasn't really that into the community, I guess, back then. So I just made my own. It was fun. I learned some stuff, and so I was like, oh yeah, let's see what this new service util is that Microsoft has. And well, can I just extend this? And I'd really like to do this. I think the number one thing I wanted to do was option sets. I think by default option sets were option sets, and I wanted to do enums. And I think I'm trying to think if they came out with that feature or if I came out with that feature. I don't remember. But I did come out with the ability to. I know I came out with the ability to at least have both of them side by side. Right. Because that way you fit all this legacy code that was using option sets. Well, I'd really like to switch over to enums, but I can't do it all at once. So how do I do this? And so I was like, well, if I could just create a duplicate property with a postfix of enum, then I'd be able to have both on there and be able to play with them as I wish. So that was one of the first major contributions I made to that to be able to do that. So yeah, and then I think splitting up the files is like probably the next major thing I did. I was like, this is way too many files in a single file. So
I think so. The main driver to start using early bound generator was the splitting of the file because no one wanted that big clunky file in their repo. It just made it like it took forever for Visual Studio to load if it's in the repo.
It's funny. I even talked to Matt Barber. He's like, we tried reaching out to the Visual Studio people about, can we get this big file to load? And they're like, no, we're not going to. We spend time and effort trying to figure out how to load up a 40 megabyte C# file. No, split it up. And yes, so that's why the new Dataverse builder actually does that by default. Yeah. Right. So yes. So yeah. Some people are still on that single file. They still like that for some reason. I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, it's harder to read, harder to maintain, and it's just clunky and slows down your Visual Studio. So
yeah, doing diffs, you have no idea what file changed, what class changed. I don't know. It's what file is this? I don't know. What class is this? I don't know. So yeah. Yep. Yeah. So that's it.
Cool. Well, so let's dive into the newer version of early bound generator, which is called V2. So why don't you go ahead and then share your screen and then show our viewers what that looks like.
All right. Okay. So this is the early bound generator V1. And the key things that you'll see on here that are no longer in V2 is you've got buttons for creating your options, your actions, and your entities separately. And then you've got one giant one for doing them all. That's kind of the number one major change we have between V1 and V2. But so I'll just point that out so that you can look at it now and go, oh yeah, this is not in the new version. But outside of that, a lot of the stuff is the same. A lot of the stuff hasn't changed. So by default, it creates a default settings and you use the default settings. But really the way to go through and actually manage it is that you put your settings file in your source control so other people can use it. And then you use that path as your relative path for all these other paths here. So there's a relative path for output of this, relative path for that, and so forth. This is pretty much the default settings in the V1, except I've made a messages folder, an entities folder, and a option sets folder, just to make sure that those are split out. And I've limited the messages and the entities to just a few. Back in the day, I didn't know why didn't people want to do all of the files? Why don't they want to do everything? And then as I got into the online world, I was like, oh, there are a lot more entities out here, and that's a lot of stuff. And now I know why people don't want to generate everything. So we, added things as I've gone through it. So in this case, if you go through and you click this button, it's going to actually pop up and ask you to log in. And that's the number one disadvantage that we have with V1 is that it is totally a shelled operation. Everything shells out to the CRM SVC util. So if I go open up the actual plugins folder and look at the plugins folder in all of its glory, you will see this is in the XrmToolBox, under the plugins, there is an early bound generator which contains the CRM service util, this exe, and then config, and then all the DLLs and stuff associated with running the tool. So the only thing it's doing is it's going through and updating this config file, and it's going through and calling the exe. The issue is there's no way to do it for all of them at once. So that's why I got 3 different buttons. And so you got to click each one individually. And of course, being lazy, you don't want to do that if you can help it. So you do the create all, which shells out all 3. But then you could even potentially get into some multi-threading issues too with that. Every now and then I've run into that. If I do all of them, maybe it's trying to update a project file or something, and both of those command lines are running at the same time. And anyway, so there are some slight issues, very rare, but some slight issues even running that. So, but that's how it works. Not everyone notices this. Not everyone knows this beneath the covers. That it's just entirely the CRM service util, and then my own little extensions and this DLL that then gets called for that. So, let's say you've been using this for a while. Everything's great. Everything's happy. Everything's hunky dory. And now you're gonna drink some of my Kool-Aid. I'm saying here, like, hey, you need to switch over to the new version. It's better. It's faster. Yada yada yada. Let's see what that looks like. So if I go ahead and open up the V2 of it.
So
it's actually, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but just so that we know that there's V1 and there's V2. There are 2 tools in XrmToolBox today, right? So whenever users wants to upgrade to V2, they have to go to the tools and then install the V2 version. Correct?
Yeah, it's a completely different plugin. It's a completely different XrmToolBox plugin. So the main reason is I wanted to make it's completely different underneath the covers because it's using the new data model stuff. Right. And then the other issue is that I didn't want to break anything that was going on with people that were using V1. And then right now there's no way to use V2 in a script mode for on-prem because the model builder doesn't support on-prem currently. Mm-hmm. You could easily write yourself a wrapper that connects to it and then provides an iOrization service to the data model builder and go from there. Easily do that. Right now, I haven't invested the time to allow that. So if you're on premise and you want to run this as a part of your pipeline, you're still stuck on V1 unless you just write a little wrapper over that data model builder. So, But anyway, yes. So did I answer your question, or was that a question?
Yeah.
Or was I just talking? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, yeah, you did.
All right. So I'm going to go back through and I'm going to reset this to, okay. So we have a couple of options here. We have reset to default settings. So this picks default settings that come by default for the early bound generator. You can reload from a file. You can open existing and save. So these two are new for that. And then also we'll see we have our single generate button here. So I think I think this had an issue that it's loading some settings that are straight from V1s. I'm going to copy over on my box here. I've got the early bound settings from V1. Close this because it should go through and automatically update to what I guess would be the correct version. So I replace this. Cool. And now if I do a win merge on it, we should see that, yes, we have the same exact settings here. So these settings are just what's used to generate the stuff in the config file for the CRM service util in V1.
So what this means is that if people are upgrading from V1 to V2, they can just point to their existing settings file, and then everything should just work
Correct.
as expected.
Correct. Yes. And actually, I think I tested this before, and I think I messed up my settings. Let me go to the V2 plugin settings. That's what it is. Settings, and then DLaBar. Go find the correct. There we go. There we go. So both the early bound generator 1 and 2 it'll associate per connection the early bound file that you're using. And so it's going to automatically load that for you. So that way, if you switch between different clients and stuff, it works. So if I load now, yes. So now this is what you see by default is it doesn't have any settings. So it says, I don't know, I'm going to use these default settings that are in the settings folder for the XrmToolBox. Okay. So you'd say, okay, you get this nice little warning message here. Hey, you have the default settings, and it gives you some best practices for this. Save a copy of the default settings, the same directory as where the files we generated, and then check it into source control, and then why you do that. And then you can click the button in the top right to save the settings when they're generated. So I will go ahead and open to actually go find that temp file that I was using before. So V1. Okay. So I've just moved it to this folder here, but I'll open that one. All right. I'm going to click the save button because it actually went through and it did some magic to that file. And I will save it to the settings file there. Yep, cool. All right. And so now if I go through and do my WinDiff here and refresh it, you can see what are the changes that have happened to this thing. So first off, major changes is we had all these arguments here that had to be specified before, and this is what was being passed into the command line to figure out, hey, you need to pass in this particular parameter, this particular parameter, this particular parameter, all that stuff. Well, it's no longer in V2, no longer using any shelling. It's actually harvesting the model builder directly from the SDK, or not the SDK, but from the NuGet from Microsoft. And that now supports giving it an prioritization service and being able to utilize that going forward. So that's what it's doing here. I wonder if that's going to give me a headache. I was going to, my small screen that was good for sharing is down here. But I was like, I wonder if I could all run it off of this one, but there's a delay and I'm going to get a headache. So anyway, I back up. So what other things have changed here? So we have a few changes here in the services, how those are defined. So now here's where I define what are the actual services that are going to be used. Before those are all arguments. Now it's like, hey, I want to custom service. I want you to use this particular service. So there's no thing, you can always create your own customizations, just like it allows you to do. Microsoft allows you to do. And then you can inject those in instead of mine if you want. There's nothing keeping you from doing that. We just update that value there. We have some additional values that get populated here. And so these are some additional things that weren't in the old one. Probably the key one here that you would see would be the JSON settings. Microsoft with the model builder went with you can inject some stuff into the command lines, but the easiest way for me as a tool writer was to go through and be able to just dump everything into the JSON file, because that was what they would say. Hey, here's a JSON file, contains all the settings, and this is exactly what I was doing before in V1 for the CRM service util, except it was in the config for the exe. Now they're just using a JSON file. So I basically put every setting I can to the JSON file and then pass in the bare minimum parameters to the exe. So that way, if you do want to run it as a part of your pipeline, you don't have to worry about a really long command line. It should just be a few, I think it's a 1 or 2 parameters. Path the JSON file and then like one other parameter I think you have to pass in, something like that. It's very minimal. Yeah. So anyway, those just, and then we have a few other options that come through here. Camel casing has additional parameters required here, and nothing else really to call out. Pretty kind of minor stuff, but these are new settings in here. And as I keep on doing things, I'm done adding features to the V1 version. So I'm going to attempt to, if something's broken, I'll attempt to fix it. If somebody has a feature that they want to add, sure, I'll accept the PR, but I'm not going to spend any time working on it because it's going the way of the buffalo, right? So here's an example of one that I've got a logging flag built in that CRM Service Utility doesn't support. So that's an example of something else that'll show up in here. And then these are actually ordering changes. So I changed the order of where that is in the XML file. Not a whole lot of other stuff behind that. It added some additional token capitalization stuff. So there's some other stuff that I say, hey, this is a word, use it as a word, but right now I'm not utilizing that. So don't worry about that too much. And I think that's about all that I'll point out for this stuff. Yeah, that's pretty much about all I'll point out. You can always know too that it keeps track of the version of the tool that you're running. And the version of the settings that you last ran. So that way, if you use a new version of the tool and you generate it, and then your coworker goes and tries to generate it from source as well, it'll go, oh, you're on an older version of the tool than this was last generated. And it'll give them a warning. And that'll hopefully prevent them from attempting to generate something that's going to break what was generated before if there's some new feature or something else that person took advantage of. So anyway, that's in there as well. It's kind of an interesting kind of look behind the scenes. So
I think so that's a nice feature to have, because if someone is upgrading and that changes something, suddenly they don't review it, then it's a good code review check that the reviewer can do. So yeah, definitely, I think so. It's a very good feature.
Yeah, I was on a project once where I had people that were breaking things because they weren't using the latest version. I was like, dang it, this is going to go on the tool, and this is going to So a lot of the stuff is stuff that I've ran into. Okay, so I try to do my ultimate best to ensure that when I make this, when I do the upgrade, it will recreate your entities in such a way that it will not break the code that utilizes it. The key point to understand here is that whenever Microsoft made a change with how they by default were organizing their files, particularly these are option sets, by default, the local option sets are now generated in the same file as the entity, which makes a lot of sense to me because that shouldn't make the file too large. And then you don't have all these extra option set files and like what entity does this go to and all that kind of stuff. So that's the way they did it by default. I didn't go through and say, all right, I'm going to pull this all out and make it look exactly like it was before. No. So the idea is that whenever you regenerate, you may need to delete files. And there is an option to go through and delete, delete files. There's some delete files option here somewhere in the global. Delete file from output folder. So if you have ideally you wouldn't have any other files in those folders besides generated files. And if that's the case, you can mark that as true, and then it's going to delete everything in there when it runs to make sure that you have just what you've actually configured. And if you add an entity and then you remove it from the configuration, you won't have that file sitting there. That makes sense. So that may be the one thing you want to turn on when you first run it the first time is to clear out all those old option sets. But you don't have to. You can do that manually. You'll get compile errors. Hey, you got this option set defined multiple places, and then you will have to go through and remove it from your project or delete it, whatever you're going to do. But that's it. So I've gone through and I've done that change. And then, I've done nothing besides actually load my settings file. And now when I click generate, it's going to generate in the V2 folder just because I copied over to another folder. So when you're running this in your project, it's in source control. You wouldn't move the folder at all. You just run it and let source control handle that. But for the demo here, that's what I'm doing. So now when I click on generate, you'll notice a couple things if you've never used it before. Number one, that took 4 seconds. And running this with the CRM Service Utility took like 2 minutes because Microsoft did a much, much better job of only grabbing the metadata they need. And so that way you don't have to be downloading all this metadata. And we do it one time for actions or messages, whatever you want to call them. Microsoft changed it to calling messages, option sets, and entities. All those things are done in one shot. So you don't have to do 3 sets of metadata like you did before. So just those quality of life improvements are great. You can also see called out here that we do have the command line for this. So pack, mall, or build, output directory. So the only thing I give it is an output directory and the settings template file. Those are the only parameters I give it. So taking this JSON file that gets generated by the early bound generator and this command line, you can go run this wherever you want to run this as long as you're on-prem. Online. There we go.
Right.
On-prem, you only be able to do it through the early bound generator UI because that gives an I organization service to the builder. So, and of course, you have to be logged in order for that to work. But I don't have to worry about the login, which is great. Because in the V1, whenever I actually, you can look in the code base. There's a little, I have a white flag of surrender that I have in there for, I decode the password encrypted by the XrmToolBox and use that to try to log in with your credentials. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and you have to log in through the UI tool, which is really annoying. And I was like, I don't have a better way of doing this, guys. I'm sorry. Yeah, if you get tired of that, V2 completely eliminates that, which is awesome.
Right. But then, so for V2, because it's using the pack commands, do they have to create the authentication profiles, or you just use whatever is provided in the XrmToolBox connection?
Yeah. So if they are going to run the command line, they will need to go through and make sure they have a authentication profile set up to connect to it, right? If they're going to run it through the XrmToolBox creates the I organization service, and then that just gets passed into the code itself. So it's no longer shelling out, and so therefore you don't have to worry about any sort of authorization because it's already been authorized through the toolbox. So yeah. So now I've officially put all of the work of connecting to your organizations on Tangi, which is a good person to put it on. So if you can't get connected to it, it's his fault. I had lots of bugs with I can't get connected to it, and I was like, I don't know, I didn't have the environment, I didn't have custom ADFS set up, I didn't have any of these things to test it with. So yeah. So if you are are they listeners or watchers of the show? What do we want to call
watchers?
Yeah. Watchers. If you're a watcher,
viewers.
Viewer. If you're a viewer of the show, please give me, please let me know if it doesn't create it in a way that you can, that causes you build errors. Like for example, I was walking through this and my settings works fine because I use the option to have it automatically guess at what your capitalization should be camel case wise, because no one ever creates the attributes and entities with the correct camel casing that I would like as a developer. They usually they use logical names and so it's all lowercase. And then if I'm typing and I have a really long word, I like to be capital letter, tab to get like the autocomplete. And they don't do that for me with that one. So I always use the dictionary form of auto guessing of what your camel casing should be. So, but so that's what I tested with. It works on my machine, but I realized when I was going through today that I did have one bug I need to actually go through and handle. And that's this one right here, where my count state says V1 was a capital A, and now it's a lowercase a when generating it. So ideally, you shouldn't have to change any of your code base outside from deleting the files, because now we have, if we look at this, we have all these extra account territory code, account status code, all this stuff that's in V2 that now sits in the account class itself, where previously it was all sitting in the option set folder. So if you go to the option set, you'll see that we don't have any of these other sets in here. We only have one global set here. The power, this is the only one that's the same here. So,
so initially in V1, we sometimes used to run into issues because it was not part of the entity class. It was part of the global classes, the option sets. And then if there are two option sets with the same name, then one of them has to have a 1 in postfix to it, and the other one did not. And then sometimes if you generate it later on or someone else generates it, it is to switch those ones to something else. So we have seen that issue. Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, but then that wouldn't happen in V2 because V2 are the option sets that get generated are class specific, correct?
Well, they get put in the same class. I don't know if you have the issue where you have both a global option set and a class table specific option set. I think the naming conventions by default exclude those, so I think you shouldn't have an issue. But if you do run into that, let me know. I'll see the best I can do to try to figure out how to go through and change that. Because what I have done in the past is, hey, Microsoft, what should this be named? All right, it's named this. And I keep on going, oh, what should this be? Oh, I already have something named this. I need to give it a different value. So that's how I fixed it before in the past. And maybe I ran into an issue where, depending on how it was going through and looping, maybe it would grab one first and then the other. And so then it said, oh, well, this one really should be this one. And then it would switch. So if that's the case, let me know. The early bound generator has so many permutations of possibilities or how you want to have your settings. I just can't test them all. So I make sure mine works because, I'm special. I make sure mine works. But if yours doesn't work, I'd like to know that so it works for somebody else down the line. So that's a key point for that.
Right. Yeah. So for all the viewers out there, if you run into any issues, please make sure that Daryl knows. And then you have to go to his GitHub, and then his GitHub link will be provided in the video's description, so you can certainly
it's right in the tool. Help feedback for early bound visual to V2 early bound generator, and so it'll take you right here, and you can enter in, this is my issue, and this is what's going on with it, and I can go through and try to resolve that issue. The other thing that I don't think anyone that people don't really know about that's very helpful, especially if you want to create your own extensions to this or you want to test this, the new version of it actually has a really simple way to go through and run this locally in a unit test for yourself. All you need to do is in this debug option, there's a serialized metadata. If you check that to true, it's going to save the metadata that's being returned. And then when you, in the unit test for the plugin, when you go and download it, there's a unit test that's generate classes, and by default it doesn't run, but you can just go through and change the config for it to run, specify, hey, here is my serialized metadata to use, and here's my JSON file to use. You give the JSON file as well, and then it will go through and generate those locally, so you can debug it, put a breakpoint in, figure out what's going on with this service, why is it being named this or whatever, and you can make your own extensions, make some improvement. Like, it's a really simple way to do that. And I have a walkthrough in the GitHub repository for how to go through and submit these serialized settings, so you can use that to figure out how to run that as well. So kind of a neat feature.
That's cool.
That's it out there. Anything else I was going to say on that? No, that's about it. I did have somebody that got a little confused when they were looking at all these settings. Like, hey, some of these settings don't exist when I look at the default. So if I reset to the default settings, like things don't show up. You can see some things showed up when I did that, and that's because sometimes some of these settings only show up if they're applicable. So if I have the entity set up to not create one file per entity, and I say false, then first off, the relative path changes because now it's an actual settings file. But then I also don't need to worry about some of the settings for what the path is at. I'm trying to see what those. Oh, I'm not seeing where it's at right now. But whenever you have things that are, hey, do it this way, do it that way, it changes things. So camel case members, custom words, generate types as defaults. Yeah, looking at that. Anyway, yeah.
But then,
do you have other things you want? Let me know.
Yeah, but then the other question that I have is, like, what is your preferred settings? What is the recommended settings? Is that the one that just loads by default? Is that the one that people should be just using, or do you have any recommendations?
So my recommendation to start with is to do the default to start with. That attempts to be my best guess. The only problem with that is I do my very darndest to make sure I'm not breaking you with an update. So if I have a new feature that's going to somehow require you to change code, I'm going to bring that in as disabled to begin with, or not enabled. And so you may lose out on some features if you're not just saying, hey, what else is out here, playing with things. And I try to post things. Hey, this is a new feature that's out here, and all the updates for the release notes and the tool will show you, hey, I did this, and everything's in GitHub to say, hey, this is the change I made, here's the enhancement I made. So if you want to go through and look at some enhancements to play around with that, that would be one thing to do. One thing I would highly recommend that isn't default is to camel case the names. Actually, it is a default. Reset settings default. I guess it is the default. Yes, it is the default. It is not the default from V1. So if I go through and load the V1 file, it was not the default. But V2, I do say I go through and say, hey, I'm going to attempt to guess at how to go through and parse your strings for your values to give you correct camel casing. And then, so that's the one feature to make sure that you have turned on. If you're going from V1 to V2, I'd recommend giving that a shot, although that's going to require most likely quite a bit of changes to your code base. So that's why it's not turned on by default.
Cool.
And then number one thing after that is only put the entities you need, only put the messages you need. That's probably the next thing to do that. And then I think by default, the generate only the fields you need. Create one. Let me see if it's in the default. Clean up, add one file. Generate option sets. There's one that's only give it the ones you need. I'm not seeing right now. Metadata. Also, take note that everything at least has some explanation of what this does. I'd love to have like a picture that says, this is what this does and this is what that does. But the problem is you have so many things that combine together that you may not generate the actual thing that you would like it to do. So
how hard would it be to add a search box on the top that can search either the description or the title of the option?
That comes down to how well I know my WinForm data grid view. Right now, I don't know how well I know that. Because even getting these things to like for example, the entities, if you have some entities selected, great. If I go through and remove all the entities and save that, then it gives you like getting it to do that was a little bit tricky for me. So I don't. I would love to have it. If someone knows how to do it, great. But I probably don't have time to figure that out at this point in time.
If someone else knows how to do it, just create a PR and Daryl will approve it, right?
The other thing that I started to go through and do that I just ran out of time was to be able to go through and specify particular properties that you actually want. So that way you can limit to just what you want. Lots of times, maybe you have a third party tool that's added some columns to your table. You don't want to ever reference those because that's not your stuff. Yep. Like you should be able to not have that in there. So, so that's one thing I'd like to be able to do. The UI for it, I gave up on after spending 3-4 hours. I'm like, I can't get the UI for this to look right. And putting things in by hand is kind of a pain. So anyway, eventually I would like to get rid of the XML file and just go strictly with the builder JSON file, because most everything in that file is in the early bound generator as well. So there's not a whole lot. Like anything that's specific to me sits in here. Then everything else is just by default stuff that exists in the JSON file definition for the Microsoft Model Builder. So they took a lot of what I had and pulled it out into this. So it made it fairly easy to migrate, but it still took some figuring out, a couple bugs in their end. Hey, you guys, this is a bug, fix it. But we'll get there.
Yep. Well, this was cool. Thanks, Daryl, for coming on the show and then explaining us how to properly use early bound generator. What are the right way of doing things, recommended settings, and how do you make the conversion from V1 to V2? So thank you very much. And I forgot, but I just it reminded me that you were the first one to approach me when I released my first XrmToolBox called PCF Builder. It was a few years ago. And again, you and Jonas has inspired me to do more for the community. So thank you for that as well.
All right. Well, good. I'm glad that was helpful for you. So one other thing I'll call out, especially for people that are creating tools in the XrmToolBox, is with the latest version of the XrmToolBox, I don't need to IL merge any of my code anymore. It will load it. It will load the DLLs correctly from the correct folder automatically for you. So in the plugins for this, if you look at this one, I've only got one of my DLLs here. That's because it's IL merged. But if you look at the V2, I've gone through and I've got multiple DLLs that are mine that are sitting out here. And the early bound or the XrmToolBox is smart enough to know, I'm going to look in this plugins folder and if I don't have the DLL that I need, even the version that I need, I'm going to go and grab it automatically. So that makes life easier as a developer for the XrmToolBox. So that's a quick shout out to anybody that's doing XrmToolBox development, even you.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
I
haven't tried a newer version.
Yeah. So. It also may have broke the plugin registration tool for the XrmToolBox. So I was kind of the instigator of that change. I'm sorry, everybody. This Microsoft PC, what's one of these DLLs in here is a version that's different than what the XrmToolBox uses, and it doesn't find it. And so I think he updated it, the latest version, so the latest version works. But there's been a lot of chatter this week about, hey, the XrmToolBox is broken, I can't load any plugins. And that was, I think that was a combination of my fault and then the plugin registration maintainer as well. So, but it has to be my fault because I'm the one that made the change to break it. But anyway,
Jonas had a post on how to fix it though, so that was really helpful.
Oh, okay, yeah, he's a post on that.
Yeah, right. He had a post on that one. Yeah.
I went through and updated at least. There's multiple ways to fix it. You can replace the file in the XrmToolBox folder. You could put this file in another one. Someone commented on one of the GitHub repos that you could go through and just install Enterprise or Early Bound Generator v2. And because I had the plugin that they need, I had the DLL that they need in there, it solves it as well there. So it's just kind of funny that I also had a workaround for it that I wasn't intended, but yeah, did use. So anyway. Yeah, that's always kind of fun.
Yeah, but it was a nice change. So
yes,
it's always good for the future. So
yes, it'll be much better going forward for people to not have to go through. And there's so many bugs that I've ran into far more issues trying to IL merge plugins for the XrmToolBox than I ever have for IL merge in plugins.
Yep, I can attest to that as well.
Outside of really getting annoyed trying to test things with IL merged plugins and having multiple entities existing for different DLLs, but not be the same thing. Like that's the only issue I ran with my plugins, which is very unusual to be doing. But actually running on the server, I've never ran into an issue with IL merging my plugins, as long as I included the DLLs that I needed. So, but for the XrmToolBox, there's lots of workarounds I've had to do. Like, oh dang it, this won't work because of this, and I have to do this, and So anyway, yes. So that's another call out I'll make to those people. So.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again for coming on the show. And for all the viewers out there, please go and try out version 2. If you run into any issues, please please report it to Daryl so he can take a look at it. He can improve it so everyone else can get the benefit out of it.
Totally. And if there's some big feature that you want that I don't have the time for, but you want just in 10 minutes, I can show you how to get it set up and start working on it. Like if it's, hey, I love that. Don't have the time for it, but I'll give you 10 minutes of my time to help you get set up so you can actually start working on that. I mean, talk to me. We'll work something out. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks for offering that.
Yeah.
And thanks for coming on the show.
Yep. No problem. Glad to be here. Good talking to you.
Hey.